Okay, let's unpack this. When we think of the American Civil War, the image that often comes to mind is this clear-cut moral crusade, right, to end slavery.
Right.
But our sources for this deep dive, well, they suggest a far more nuanced and maybe even surprising truth about the North's initial motivations.
Indeed. What's really striking is how preserving the Union, which was, deeply tied up with economic interests and even widespread racial prejudice, were huge factors right from the get-go, often taking precedence over immediate abolition.
So our mission today is to explore these documents, dig into the facts that challenge that common understanding, maybe offer you a fresh perspective on this pivotal moment.
Yeah, definitely worth looking closer.
So you might expect President Lincoln's top priority to be freeing slaves, right?
Sure.
But what do our sources actually reveal about his focus, especially in the early years of the war?
Well, his own words from 1862 are quite illuminating, aren't they?
They really are. He famously stated his paramount object was to save the Union, not, and this is the key part, save or destroy slavery.
Exactly. And he added, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it.
Wow.
Yeah. This perspective is so crucial. It shows that for Lincoln, emancipation sort of evolved into a military strategy. It was a means to an end, not some pre-war moral commitment.
Right, a strategic necessity almost.
Precisely. He actually rescinded an early emancipation order by one of his generals because he was worried. Feared it would push those crucial border states right into the Confederacy.
Okay, so that's the political calculation. And speaking of motivations, what about Lincoln's personal views on race during that period? Our documents touch on this, and it might surprise some listeners.
Well, back in 1858, Lincoln openly stated his preference for having the superior position assigned to the white race.
Really stark language.
It is. And he believed in a physical difference that, in his view, would prevent social and political equality between the races.
And didn't he also advocate for colonization later?
Yes, exactly. The idea of sending freed slaves to another country, maybe Liberia or somewhere in Central America, it really highlights that his views, while they certainly evolved over time, were very much shaped by the prevailing prejudices of his era.
So not exactly a personal crusade for immediate racial equality or integration back then?
Not in the beginning, no. It was much more complex.
Okay, so if Lincoln's approach was that pragmatic and his personal views reflected, the norms of the time, how did the Union Army itself initially handle the idea of black soldiers?
Well, initially, federal law actually barred black men from serving, strictly barred them.
So free black volunteers in 1861 wanting to fight for the Union.
They were turned away. Our sources are clear on that.
But that changed, didn't it?
It did, but mostly out of necessity. This exclusionary policy just became unsustainable. By mid-1862, you have these mounting manpower shortages.
Right.
And that forced a shift. Congress acted, and later the Emancipation Proclamation itself authorized black enlistment.
But it wasn't equal footing, was it?
Oh, definitely not. Even then, black soldiers faced segregation within the Army, and they received unequal pay until 1864. It really underscores that their inclusion was driven more by military necessity, by pragmatism, rather than a sudden moral awakening across the board.
Okay, so the Army eventually brings black men in, but driven by need. Meanwhile, what about public sentiment back home in the North? Was everyone behind emancipation or even the war?
Not at all. And perhaps the clearest, most, shocking evidence of resistance was the New York draft riots in 1863.
Ah, yes, the draft riots.
Huge event. You had white working-class New Yorkers violently protesting conscription. But it wasn't just the draft. It was intense hostility towards the idea of a war to free slaves. Our sources mention them using just awful, deeply offensive racial slurs, calling it a war for the Negroes.
The social tension there must have been incredible.
It really was. And think about this. Wealthy men could pay $300, which is like a year's wages, for a laborer then to avoid service entirely.
Right, buy their way out.
Exactly. Meanwhile, black men, who were initially exempt because they weren't considered citizens, became targets of the mob's fury.
So the anger wasn't just about the draft, but also directed racially.
Absolutely. Mobs attacked black citizens, their homes, businesses. They even burned down the colored orphan asylum. It just reveals this deep-seated, visceral racism and fierce opposition to a war they perceived as being fought solely to free slaves.
It paints a vivid and, frankly, pretty disturbing picture of the tensions, doesn't it?
It really does.
So, taking all this into account, Lincoln's initial focus, the Army's policies, the public riots, How do historians today view this? How do they reconcile these complex motivations?
Right. The consensus, reflected in sources like analysis from the National Park Service, confirms that while slavery was undeniably the cause of the war,
Right, the fundamental cause.
the Union's initial overriding goal was preserving the nation. It wasn't immediate emancipation from the outset.
Yeah.
And if you connect this to the broader academic discussion, you have scholars like Mark Egnell, for instance, who really emphasize the economic factors.
Economics, like what?
Things like Northern desires for protective tariffs, which the South opposed, and the whole free soil ideology, wanting to keep slavery out of new Western territories, not necessarily for moral reasons, but to preserve opportunities for white farmers and workers.
Interesting. So economic competition playing a big role, too.
A very significant role. Egnell suggests that, quote, economics, not a moral crusade, brought on the war. And he reminds us, abolitionists were actually a distinct minority at the time.
So this whole deep dive, it really reveals the Civil War as this incredibly complex conflict, shaped by, a powerful mix of unionism, definite economic interests, and these deeply embedded racial attitudes.
Right.
Not just a singular, clear-cut moral crusade, especially not at the start.
Exactly. It complicates the narrative we often hear. And, this reevaluation of history, it raises a pretty important question, I think, for you, the listener, to consider. If legal abolition, when it finally came, didn't immediately resolve racial inequality, and we know it didn't, what enduring lessons does this history hold for us today, for our ongoing pursuit of racial justice and, just a more complete, honest understanding of our past?
That's a powerful thought to ponder as you continue your own deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.